What's up everybody, Nate here. So in today's video, we are discussing 6 ultralight backpacking mistakes that you will quickly regret. And I know this for a fact because I have made the vast majority of these mistakes.
That was a pretty miserable night.
Let's not waste any time. We'll get right into mistake number 1, which is thinking that all trail runners are the same. So why could you possibly regret this? Well, let me tell you a quick story of when I decided to hike the long trail several years ago. So I was doing some research on some gear and I saw that ultras were very popular trail runners. Everyone was talking about them and I said, you know what, they must be good shoes because everybody's talking about them, everybody's wearing them. I'm gonna pick myself up a pair of ultras. I'm gonna hike the long trail in those. It's gonna be great. Well, let me just say this, that was the biggest mistake I made when I decided to hike the long trail. I was in immense pain for 90% of my hike. I felt like my calves, my Achilles tendons were on fire. They were burning so bad.
My left Achilles tendon feels like it's on fire. It like burns, it stings, almost feels like it's getting stabbed.
So why did this happen? Well, ultras are referred to as a zero drop trail runner. Now, if you don't know what drop is, let me just explain it real quick. Drop refers to how high your heel is compared to how low your toes are. The vast majority of trail runners out there, hiking boots, and actually your everyday shoes that you wear in just your everyday life have a drop in them. Now your body gets used to wearing shoes like that, at least my body did. So when I decided to transition into an ultra, basically just overnight, which is a zero drop shoe, meaning that your toes and your heels are essentially on the same plane, my body reacted and reacted bad. Now that happened because that zero drop actually physically stretched all of the ligaments, all of the tendons, all of the muscles in my calves, in my Achilles, all the way up my calves. It stretched those out. And because of that, that's why I was experiencing all those burning sensations and all of that pain. So if you are going out and you're getting yourself a pair of trail runners, just be aware of this. And to be honest, guys, I actually do recommend wearing a zero drop or near zero drop shoe if you can handle it. That's how your foot would naturally fall if you were walking without shoes, right? So us naturally as human beings walk, for lack of a better term, flat-footed. So if you are gonna get into shoes like that, you have to transition into them slowly. Don't make the same mistake that I did, transition into zero drop if that's your plan. But in general, guys, all these trail runners, they're not built the same. Be aware of that before you go out and buy and spend $200 on it. So mistake number 2 is thinking that ultralight rain gear will actually keep you dry. So you will seriously regret this if you don't believe this is true, and let me tell you why. My Outdoor Research Helium 2 is an ultralight rain jacket. It's about 7.5 ounces, and I love that rain jacket for its weight, but unfortunately, the DWR coating on that jacket wears off constantly. Now, DWR is needed for these rain jackets to perform to their optimal standards. So once the DWR, the Dura waterproof repellent, wears off that jacket, unfortunately, any moisture, any rain that hits that outer layer of your jacket, well, it's not going to beat it off anymore. It's actually going to absorb it. Now, this is a condition known as wetting out. And once your jacket wets out, unfortunately, it loses all of its breathability. So instead of getting wet from the rain on the outside, you actually get wet from the condensation on the inside of your jacket.
You're soaked. I know, your top layer.
So why is that DWR coating wearing off my jacket and most other ultralight jackets so often? Well, because the coat is made to be ultralight, or the pants, whatever you're talking about, they're made to be ultralight. And one of the ways they accomplish this is by using a thin outer material. Now that thin outer material, that thin outer shell, because it's thin, actually uses quite literally a thinner thread. Now, if you compare that to a more traditional rain jacket, those generally have a thicker outer layer, a thicker outer shell. And because those are thicker, the threads that make up those outer layers are thicker as well. Now, when we go to apply DWR to those thinner threads, there's literally less surface area for that DWR to adhere to. And because there's less surface area, that DWR just doesn't get applied as thick or as well as compared to a more traditional raincoat. And that's why DWR wears off of ultralight rain gear all the time, much quicker than more traditional gear. So what's the fix for this? Well, you can just, again, reapply your DWR. I have to do that several times a year actually with my Outdoor Research Helium 2, and still I experience wet out more often than I would like. So before you go out and spend a ton of money on like an Arc'teryx rain shell or whatever it is, just be aware that all these rain jackets, essentially, they all perform the same way or lack thereof. Now, mistake number 3 is thinking that down is always going to be better than synthetic. So let's say you're hiking on the trail and it's cold outside. You stop, you need to stay warm, you whip out your down layer, but it starts to rain outside. It starts to rain hard outside. Now, you can always put on your rain jacket, but like we just got done discussing, rain layers, they don't do a good job. Once down gets wet, once it gets saturated enough, even if it's treated for water repellency, it'll just stop providing heat for you. You're gonna have a miserable time. Basically, your insulative layer is useless. So that's why I recommend synthetic wearables. Sometimes you do still have to bring down if it's super cold outside, but if you can avoid it, I would avoid down wearables. That's because ultralight gear is meant to be multifunctional, right? So if you have a down jacket that you can only wear in very specific circumstances, basically when it's just dry outside or when you're under your shelter or whatever, that's not a great piece of multifunctional gear, as opposed to a synthetic jacket, which can get wet and still provide warmth for you. You can use those synthetic jackets and those synthetic layers in way more conditions and way more circumstances. That's a hallmark of ultralight backpacking, is having gear that has multifunctional uses. And synthetic typically is a lot cheaper than down, so you can save yourself several bucks by going with something synthetic. Now, when it comes to your quilt, I still recommend that you go with something down because warmth to weight, packability, you can't beat down. It absolutely demolishes synthetic, blows it out of the water. And one more thing to consider here to help drive this point home is Mountain Laurel Designs and Enlighten Equipment both make a ton of synthetic gear. I'm sure you've heard of Enlighten Equipment's Tour jacket, which is synthetic, which is super popular. They also make synthetic booties, they make a synthetic beanie, and the reason why they do this, guys, this is an ultralight gear company. The reason why they do this is because, again, they know that gear is just more applicable, it's more multifunctional as opposed to down. So save yourself some money, save yourself some hassle, get a piece of gear that you can use in a variety of conditions. Stick with synthetics when it comes to your wearables. I think that's a good option going forward. So mistake number 4 is blowing your entire budget on dyneema products. So let's say you're just getting into ultralight backpacking and you're trying to get some ultralight gear. Well, you go to 𝐒𝐔𝐁𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐿, you go to Hyperlight Mountain Equipment, whatever it is, and you're looking at these $600 tents, you're looking at these $350, $400 backpacks, and you pick up a backpack and a tent. All of a sudden, you've spent $1,000 on just 2 pieces of gear. And it's great, like, don't get me wrong, like, dyneema is absolutely fantastic, but if you're just getting into ultralight backpacking or you're on a budget, the last thing you want to do is just go out and just blow all your money. And to drive this point home, I want to look at a couple of different tents made by a couple of different manufacturers here. So first off, we have what's called the Plex Solo tent by 𝐒𝐔𝐁𝐒𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐍. It's a dyneema tent. It's a pyramid style, 1 trekking pole dyneema tent. It comes in at 14.6 ounces, which is just incredible. Now this tent costs $600, but still 14.6 ounces. Like, that's amazing, right? Like, it's hard to beat that. Now let's look at a tent by 𝐒𝐈𝐍𝐿. Now this tent is called the One, again by 𝐒𝐈𝐍𝐿. Now this tent comes in at $250 and weighs 17 ounces. So you're talking a $350 difference for 2.5 ounces, guys. That is absolutely incredible. You can basically get the same tent, and these tents are similar design, albeit different materials, for a third of the cost. Now, I want to be fair and honest about this, that there is a big difference between these materials of these 2 tents. The thing about dyneema is it doesn't absorb water, and that's just a fantastic property of dyneema. Now, if you compare that to the 𝐒𝐈𝐍𝐿 tent that's made of nylon, one of the drawbacks of nylon is it absorbs water in quite a bit of it, actually. So a nylon tent, you will experience sagging, especially if you're in really rainy or humid conditions. You'll experience a pretty significant amount of sagging when you're in that tent. And it's almost to the point where if it gets wet enough, you might even need to make adjustments to this tent and retighten it. Now, if that's a potential issue for you, there is another material that they make tents out of, and that's polyester. So 6 Moons Designs makes a polyester tent. It's called the Lunar Solo. Polyester does not absorb as much water as nylon. But the negative thing about polyester is it's much heavier than nylon. So this 6 Moons Designs Lunar Solo comes in at 1 pound, 10 ounces. So you're talking about a 9 to 10 ounce difference between the Lunar Solo and the 𝐒𝐈𝐍𝐿 tent. But if it's worth it to you to have a material that doesn't soak up as much water, you might want to consider looking at that tent. But overall, you don't need dyneema to go ultralight backpacking. Plenty of other options out there that are a fraction of the cost. You don't need to fall for the trap unless you have the money and you absolutely want to do it. So our last mistake that we discussed leads naturally into our next mistake, which is thinking that all of your gear needs to be ultralight for you to go ultralight backpacking. I have a ton of gear that isn't ultralight, but I'm still able to go ultralight backpacking. And let me give you an example about this. So I have several Osprey backpacks that I take that are well over 2 pounds. and I'm still able to get to my 10-pound or under base weight. I also have a really heavy bivy that I take ultralight backpacking all the time, and that bivy is 1 pound 10 ounces. That's pretty heavy for a bivy. And I'm able to do this because I'm being creative about what I'm putting in my kit, but more importantly about what I'm leaving at home. But in essence, there's 2 different ways to go about this ultralight backpacking business. Way number 1, which I'm not a fan of, nor can I afford, maybe that's why I'm not a fan of it, is buying your way into ultralight backpacking. So if you have enough funds, if you have enough money, it's super easy to go ultralight, right? You just get the lightest, the best gear that you can get, throw it in a dyneema backpack, and hit the trail. All of a sudden, without really much effort other than swiping your credit card, you're an ultralight backpacker. Now, most of us don't have that luxury, so what we have to do, and me included, is we have to slowly buy this ultralight gear and kind of incorporate it into what we already have. Now, doing this, in my eyes, will make you a much stronger hiker and backpacker, because it causes you to think critically about your gear. It makes you think outside of the box about what you need to carry and what you need to leave at home. In essence, it just makes you a more critical thinker when it comes to packing your pack. And when you start using your mind and start thinking outside of the box and integrating this existing, traditional gear with this ultralight gear, ultimately that will serve you better in your entire backpacking career, as opposed to someone who just, again, buys their way into ultralight. And another point is, like, not all this ultralight gear is for everybody, right? Like, let's say you have a bad back, or you need a decently framed backpack that doesn't cost $600 by Z-Packs. You can get yourself an Osprey pack like the 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐻. The 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐻 38, the 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐻 48, those are great packs. They're relatively light, $180, whatever. You can have a very nice pack that will be more comfortable for you ultimately, because it does have a trampoline back, it has a nice frame, and again, you're spending, half of what you'd be spending on a regular dyneema backpack. So overall, just don't fall for this trap that all of your gear needs to be ultralight. It's totally bogus. And not only that, if you are just getting into ultralight and you're integrating old gear with ultralight gear, it will just ultimately make you a better backpacker because it causes you to think critically. So our next mistake, number 6, and this is a big one, it's thinking that your ultralight kit will be the same on every single trail that you hike, in every single condition you'll ever experience. So if you do this, you will regret it horribly, because one of the tenets of ultralight backpacking is packing just what you need for the particular trip that you're going on. And sometimes, not sometimes, oftentimes, that actually changes quite a bit. So let's say I'm doing a hike and there's huge water carries, like we have 20+ mile water carries. Well, that might mean I want to change what backpack I'm wearing. Maybe I want an ultralight backpack with thicker shoulder straps, or because I'm doing those long water carries, I probably need to bring more than just a 1 liter smart water bottle. Like, we have to constantly change our kits and modify our kits, and that's a huge tenet in ultralight backpacking. It's being flexible, being able to swap out different items, because when you go ultralight backpacking, essentially, guys, we are skirting the edge between comfort, safety, and danger. And I bring this up also because, I do a lot of these videos where I do like ultralight gear loadouts, or I tell you to leave certain stuff at home, and I always get comments down below that say, what happens if you experience these conditions, or what happens if it's colder outside than you expect? And my gut reaction is almost not anger, but it's almost like, well, duh. And I feel like it's more experienced people saying this, not newbies. One of the tenets to ultralight backpacking is doing your research and knowing what trail you're going to hike and knowing what conditions you're going to hike in, and preparing for those circumstances. So if I ever tell you to leave clothes at home, or if I ever tell you to do X, Y, Z, whatever, just know you have to take it with a grain of salt. And a lot of times the reason why I don't really bring this up is because I actually believe in my audience. I believe in you guys. I know in my heart of hearts that, like, for example, if it's summer outside and you're going outside, you're not even backpacking, you're going outside, it's 80 degrees and you're wearing a short and a t-shirt, you're probably going to be okay. But I also know that you have the common sense to realize that taking those particular clothes out when it's 26 degrees outside, like it is right now here in New Hampshire, that you're going to suffer and you're going to have a bad time. So that's why I don't bring up this point specifically all the time. It's just, I feel like there is a little common sense that needs to go into this ultralight backpacking thing. But just in case, just be aware that your kit that you put together is constantly changing. You're constantly modifying it. And that's just one of the side effects of being an ultralight backpacker. And one more thing to consider, guys, is sometimes, you know, the trips we go on aren't ultralight compatible. A few weeks ago, I was trying to go ultralight in -4 weather, -4 Fahrenheit degree weather. It was super cold outside. So I was like putting different pieces of gear together. I was trying this backpack with, you know, this setup and so on and so forth. And ultimately, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get my base weight below 10 pounds. So I didn't just throw caution into the wind and say, oh, well, you know, hell be damned, I'm going ultralight no matter what, because that is super dangerous. Instead, I just bit the bullet and I said, you know, I'm going lightweight backpacking instead, because it's more important for me to stay safe, to stay comfortable, than it is to go ultralight. And if you want to see that trip video that I did where I tried to go ultralight but couldn't, I'll put it right here. So make the adjustments you need to, do research, do trail condition research, do weather research, make sure you're making smart decisions. And if you do that, you should be fine. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Give this a thumbs up and I will see you in the next video. Take care.